In the US, they've got a 40% inheritance tax, and that Bitcoin is effectively lost forever. And so telling someone a secret on how to recover Bitcoin, there are so many sacrifices that are made to be in this. Bitcoiners are the very best at this when it comes to not trusting and verifying. A requirement from the US government, Elon and Trump, to jawbone the bond market. What that presents to every other nation globally, Russia, China, the ECB, Britain, the government will set a floor on the price of Bitcoin when they start accumulating and buying. Bitcoin is the obvious winner. The US has said, hey, we're pro-Bitcoin, we're pro-crypto, we want this to happen, we want the banks to do it. Absolutely brilliant in my Bitcoin journey. So I think Michael Saylor does a great job.
All right, I'm going to start off. I've got a bit of a spiel on you, and you can correct me if I get anything wrong or if I miss out on anything. So, right, do you like Pete or Peter?
Choose your own adventure. I don't mind.
All right, we'll go with Pete. Pete's a Bitcoin evangelist and a partner at the Bitcoin Advisor, where he's been helping high net worth individuals and families secure their wealth in Bitcoin since 2016, over $1 billion worth. And he hasn't lost a single sat. With more than 30 years in traditional finance, from fund management to mortgages, he's now on a mission to fix the monetary system with Bitcoin. He's a self-custody champion, a multisig master, and known for bold takes like calling Bitcoin pristine collateral and predicting it could reshape global banking. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or deep down the rabbit hole, Peter's got insights to share. So let's dive in. Talking about your bold takes, you've had a couple of predictions that you've been recorded on podcasts. Were we talking like in the billions?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And since we've had a halving since that, it should be double that. So it's not 7 anymore. It's 14 billion.
Yeah, right. Okay. And are you given a year on that, or?
I'll tell you a funny thing. Like, we used to have clients come to the office and sit down to talk about Bitcoin, and like, it's not really they're talking about Bitcoin. They want to talk about everything else that they've got. And I'm like, look, with all due respect, all that other stuff you've got is irrelevant. What's really important is understanding Bitcoin. Just for fun, I would tell them, look, I think Bitcoin will be $40 billion of Bitcoin by 2040. And their faces would drop, and I've seen the reaction on their face. They're like, how do I get out of this meeting? Because this person's clearly crazy. And I used to love sort of having the back and forward with them and saying, look, I understand how crazy this is, but you understand this is literally what I look at every day for a living. And I said, you've got 2 decisions to make here. I said, you can dismiss what I've just told you and think I'm crazy or think I'm mad, and you can walk out the door, not take action. And then we'll bump into each other 10 years down the track when you know I'm right, and you'll have a huge regret. Or you just give over to it, assume I'm crazy, but allocate some capital to it to start yourself down that journey. And it was always a fun part for me to have that conversation with clients straight off the bat, because you just watch the face change to, oh my goodness, I'm not in Kansas anymore. What's going on?
Oh, yeah, that's it. And it's just one of those things too, isn't it, with Bitcoin? Like, it takes several touch points, I think, for most people. If you're lucky enough to get it on the first touch point, well, that's, it all comes down to getting the price you deserve in a way, I guess, but I don't know. And you'd have a lot of experience with that, with your clients through the Bitcoin Advisor.
Yeah, well, that's one thing I really sort of try and, I think, push hard to. Like, a lot of people think Bitcoin's risky, but they confuse risk and volatility. Like, in traditional finance, there is that conflation of risk and volatility, and this is where, because self-custody is fraught with a whole host of traps and tricks for newcomers to Bitcoin. And a great mate of mine and a great Bitcoiner who helped set up the Bush Bash is Wizard of Oz. He calls it tuition fees. And the reason people don't allocate large amounts of their wealth to Bitcoin is when they have to self-custody it, there's a whole host of tuition fees to pay along the way in order to secure that properly. And from a work point of view, what I do with my families and with the Bitcoin Advisor is, how do you remove the risk of self-custodying Bitcoin so that you only have to deal with the volatility? And if you only have to deal with the volatility and you can remove every single point of failure from a self-custody setup, then you can move that client along a lot further to allocating much more capital to Bitcoin. And that, to me, is the most important thing with any client conversation that I have around TradFi is, great, TradFi's there and you're just going to get your 8%, or maybe if you're really good, you'll get 15 over time. But you really need to focus on this, because this is where all of your outsized returns are going to come for your portfolio over the next 10, 20 years. And by moving them from an allocation of 1 to 2% to 5 to 10%, you're going to have outsized returns that you can only dream of in the traditional portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. And those allocations keep growing, right? I mean, and I guess they need to be adjusted over time. And yeah,
And
okay, yeah, cool.
one of the funny things about that is everyone says, "Oh, how much should I allocate?" And I'm like, it doesn't matter what I tell you. You're never going to allocate what I tell you. You should, what you should. But that gives us an opportunity to come back to the client when they haven't allocated, what they should have. If the market drops a little bit, to say, "Hey, there's a whole host of, lazy capital sitting on your balance sheet somewhere that we can find and then reallocate to Bitcoin." But because it's such a novel technology and it really is a mix up between technology and an investment, there's no reference point to figure out what Bitcoin is in anything else prior to coming to Bitcoin. So it requires a lot of time and energy to really understand it on a deeper level. And probably one of the best quotes in Bitcoin, I think, is the more you know, the more you buy. For me, what I like to do is walk clients up to the deep end, put floaties on them, and then push them in and watch them try and swim and put them in a self-custody framework that they can't lose their Bitcoin. Because then, you remove one of the major constraints for allocating more capital to it. When you remove the risk of holding Bitcoin, then you only have to deal with volatility, and dealing with volatility is really just a duration problem. You just got to hold it for longer to solve the dip. So
time in the market.
Yeah.
Well, let's. I want to jump back to a bit about you and your history as well. So, like, I think over 30 years in traditional finance. Is that right?
No, it's nearly that. Yeah.
Yeah. Mortgages, fund management, the works. What was that moment that flipped the switch for you and sent you down the Bitcoin rabbit hole?
You know what? I wish I had a silver bullet, a panacea that I could share that said, "Hey, this is what solved it for me." But I think probably one of the biggest things is missing Bitcoin when it was $3 and being rude and dismissive to my brother, who was trying to be helpful, and he sort of just whispered to me, "Hey, I think you should buy some Bitcoin." And I turned around and, I wouldn't say bit his head off, but I was like, that'll never work. That's stupid. Governments will shut it down. There'll be a new Bitcoin. And then the ultimate humility of actually having to figure it out 5 years later and then buy some when the price was, basically 200, what was it, 300 or 400 times higher than when I originally heard about it. And that to me is a really, I think, important story to share, because all of us who are Bitcoiners share that story and feel that we haven't, we're too late to it and we don't have enough Bitcoin. But everyone's going to feel like that. And I look at the global adoption rates, and I think it'd be less than 1 to 2%. So although we all feel like we've missed it and, oh my goodness, we should have bought it earlier and all the rest of it, 98% of the world hasn't even woken up to the fact that this is a need, not a want. And there's a whole host of capital that, most of the capital in the world hasn't arrived at Bitcoin or understood Bitcoin yet. So we are still so early to it.
Yeah, absolutely. We hear that all the time, right? And I mean, it's so true. I mean, I guess if, I look at my own personal circle, apart from the guys in the room who are my friends here as well, but in my, family and things, it's really only me. And then, maybe a couple have dipped their toes in, but only because I've forced them into it. But in a way, said, you've got to do this. But yeah, I think, but it's, I mean, being, I guess, on Twitter or X and being in the Bitcoin, industry, I guess it's clear there's just so much going on, right? That we see. I guess we're probably. Do you think we're definitely in a bubble, or is it really all happening and all going on? And are we going to have that sort of gradually then suddenly moment? Is that coming faster and faster?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think X is a bubble, and I go into that world like you do, and it's like I feel like they're all my friends in there, in the online world, and I think it's a cacophony of sound in that world that feels a lot bigger than it is. And then you step out to traditional finance, and I'll share with you a story I met earlier this week with one of Australia's largest stockbroking houses. We were looking at offering self-custody solutions to their clients and incorporating our business into theirs in some capacity for their clients. And there was just an apathy. It was, "Oh, great, okay, thanks for educating us, and we've got ETFs, we've got MicroStrategy, we can press that at the press of a button." we don't really see the benefit in self-custodying this at this point in time. So, we're sort of good, and, we'll keep talking. And I look at that and think that's where the traditional finance world is, and that's where 99% of the world is right now. That's just like, they think Bitcoin is a cute little trinket or a toy that you can play with, and they don't understand that this is actually a need, that this is probably one rung down from oxygen. And they're going to figure it out in the next 10 or 20 years that this is, probably the second or third most important thing in their life. But at this point in time, it's just a nice little want that, it's magic internet money that can make you, fabulously wealthy really quickly. But they don't understand the social consequences that are downstream of actually owning that asset and looking after it for an extended period of time, that it gives you an insulation and a protection from any bad actor, whether it's government or private, who wants to come at you or debase your money or, God forbid. And this is one thing, talking to you guys in Victoria, one thing that, I nearly fell off my chair when I figured out your state government has this windfall gain tax. It's akin to highway robbery, but this is, these are the things that are going to be changing, that Bitcoin gives you protection for, that, most of the world doesn't really understand just yet, but they're going to figure it out really quickly. And when they figure it out, it's a need, not a want. That's when the price of Bitcoin goes up 1,000x or more.
Yeah, sorry, I'm actually not familiar with tax you're talking about. I'm in Victoria, probably because I just don't watch the media much here. But what was that, windfall?
Yeah, you have a windfall gain tax. And I might just, for the audience, has anyone heard of the windfall gain tax? Put your hand up. Yeah. So this is an insipid tax. It's basically an unrealized capital gains tax. When the government rezones your property from, say, rural to residential, and your value of your property goes from 10 million to 20 million, the government is going to take 66% of that uptick in value by way of an unrealized capital gains tax, because they've rezoned your property, give or take. Can I get a nod from the audience to say, is that kind of roughly how it works?
Yeah, right. Just on property at the moment, is it?
Yeah.
And is that live or? Yeah.
No, that's been up and running for the last 2 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that, I mean, effectively, because I hear people talking about this, like an unrealized capital gains tax on, say, Bitcoin, for example, or, I mean, if they're already doing it on property, then it's not much of a jump to do it on other assets.
Absolutely not. And this is where we talk to a lot of clients from Victoria who are selling their property to go and buy Bitcoin for that very reason. They don't want the unrealized capital gains tax. And, for clients who are sort of on the edge of the urban sprawl, who are about to have their properties rezoned, they've held these properties for 30, 40, 50 years maybe. And when they started, or when they first purchased them, they were basically farms out on the outskirts of Melbourne. And as you've had that urban creep for the last 30, 50 years come to their back door, the government now needs that land rezoned so that they can put homes on it. And I think it's criminal. These families have held this asset, cared for it, paid for it, land taxes on it for the last 50 years. And the second they get their payday and the jump in value with the rezoning of the land, the government steps in and says, we'll take 66% of it. Well, I mean, that's just that's just absolute communism. It's at its finest. I'm so upset by this. It's just insanely frustrating that the government feels like they have the right to rob you of that upside. And for what? Because they have the stroke of the pen to rezone it. They say, oh, well, it wouldn't be worth this if we didn't rezone it. It's like, no, you wouldn't have houses to build if we didn't sell it to you. So, I mean, it's incredibly frustrating. And this is where I think, with the governments around the world, and our governments in Australia, both state and federal, are effectively broke. They are looking for ways to monetize citizens in an unfair fashion. And I think more and more of these unrealized capital gains taxes are going to come through. So we've seen the first iteration of this globally with this windfall gain tax. And it's ironic that it's in Melbourne because, Victoria, because your Premier, in his infinite wisdom, signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative, which was a CCP initiative, Chinese initiative.
So this is all because of Andrews.
Well, he instituted it, so yeah, he had more to do with it than anyone else. And if you're a socialist or a communist, that seems like a fair thing to do. Just rob people of their hard-earned wealth, and they're taking effectively 66% of someone's upside. That's the equivalent to a pokies gaming tax.
That's
So
incredible. Are they doing it in the UK as well? I think I did hear something about some farmer over there who had
no,
issues
that's
with
different.
this sort of. Is it?
That's different.
Oh,
The
that's
issue I
inheritance, isn't
understand,
it?
yeah, it is inheritance tax. So in the UK, they've got a 40% inheritance tax. In the US, they've got a 40% inheritance tax. And maybe to make light and not get so dark on the plight of the Australians and particularly the Victorians, Australia is a fabulous place to die because we don't have an inheritance tax. So you don't have to deal with that, which is good news.
Yeah, that's at least one small piece of good news. But yeah, unrealized capital gains tax thing. I mean, that's pretty scary. Yeah, well, actually, it brings me to self custody, I guess, because I want to ask you about that. Obviously, if you're doing self custody, then the Bitcoin's yours, but you do have the ability to cross borders with your Bitcoin. So, in terms of self custody, I know it's been said you've secured over $1 billion in Bitcoin, so you've probably had some pretty good clients there since 2016 without losing a sat. What would be your go-to multi-sig setup? And I should just say to everyone, and you can also mention this later, but obviously Peter runs a company called the Bitcoin Advisor and can step anyone through this. Yeah, and I think this is probably something you would do through the Bitcoin Advisor, right? But what is your sort of go-to multi-sig setup, or
I love multi-sig
so,
because it reduces the single point of failure, and I think the architecture for the most successful recovery of Bitcoin, and I want to preface what I'm about to say by saying a couple of things. Firstly, there's no solutions, only trade-offs, and everyone sitting in this room on this call today is more than competent to look after and self-custody their Bitcoin. However, the little caveat, the asterisk at the end of that sentence is typically our service and the structures that we recommend are not for the Bitcoiner in the family. They are for the people who will be inheriting that. So your wives, your children, your husbands, whoever that might be, whoever you're going to leave it to needs to be in a structure that you can recover it. And this is where a lot of the Bitcoin that's currently lost is because the person who set it up has secured their Bitcoin in such an insanely secure fashion that only they are able to recover the Bitcoin. And if you're the only person who can recover your Bitcoin, then if you can't pass that secret on and you pass away, then that Bitcoin is effectively lost forever. And so what I think is the best trade-off that I've come to, because I guess some background on this, when we started giving advice on Bitcoin, we wanted clients to self-custody their Bitcoin. But the thought of letting clients walk out the door with, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars sitting on a little USB stick and securing that with 24 seed words was absolutely terrifying to me. And as an investment advisor who holds an Australian financial services license, I have a fiduciary duty and responsibility to that client to ensure the success of their custody of their Bitcoin. So I couldn't just have a client walk in the door and say, hey, let's set you up in this self-custody, write down these 24 words. We've transferred the Bitcoin onto there. Now look after that little dongle that you think's a USB stick, because there's hundreds of thousands of dollars. It'll be tens of millions of dollars in a minute. Look after that. And so when multisig really came to fruition in sort of 2017, 18, I looked at this as the best form of self-custody that we could help our clients with, because what it allowed us to do was it allowed the client to have full control, full autonomy of their Bitcoin, but it put guardrails in place, like, when you go bowling and you pull the bumpers out so that you can throw a ball down with the kids, and basically it hits one bumper and then it bounces to the other bumper, and eventually that ball is going to get to the pins and knock some over. The multi-sig or collaborative security protocol that we talk about and that we focus on is a way of putting that support around a client that's going to remove every single point of failure. And so to give you the too long didn't read of what that actually looks like, that looks like a 2 or 3 multi-sig where the client holds a key and owns the accounts, and controls the keys. They control the software key from the software provider, and they control our key. We sit there as a default backup key. Now, what that means is is that because it's a tri-party rather than the client owning two of the three keys, is that in the event that the client passes away, then the other two parties, subject to obviously the legal machinations of actually signing something on behalf of an estate, you can actually move that Bitcoin to the beneficiaries. And this is where one of the most important documents that we deliver to clients is having an estate plan protocol, which is for the pragmatic recovery of your Bitcoin. And if I look at this, a lot of people think that if I've got a last will and testament available that mentions my Bitcoin, then it's okay. But the last will and testament only covers you off for your legal requirements. But no legal decree, court mandate, government decree can actually move your Bitcoin on the blockchain. So you need to have a pragmatic recovery document. And this is where we've got clients who have an estate plan through a last will and testament with their lawyer or estate planner. And then we prepare an estate plan protocol, which is the pragmatic recovery of that document and how to move the Bitcoin in the event that the client's no longer here. And so what's involved in that document is making sure that the beneficiaries and the executor of the estate can actually find the Bitcoin and then know how to move it in the event that the client's passed away. And this is where it's really difficult telling someone a secret on how to recover Bitcoin, but ensure that it can't move while you're still alive. That's a real, that bakes your noodle trying to figure out how to do that. And this is where the multisig with collaborative security, I think, is the best form of security for doing that, because there are a whole host of trade-offs that you've got to make. But most importantly, and this is where I can share experience from, say, a personal point of view and from a client perspective, not your keys, not your coins is absolutely critical. However, as life changes, as the wealth that you have in Bitcoin changes, all of a sudden it brings a different risk profile and a different host of considerations that you need to prepare for. And what typically changes are two things in a Bitcoiner's life that usually seek us out if they've been in Bitcoin a long time. One is the wealth that they have has gone 10x or 20x or 100x, and they're now concerned about securing that themselves. Or secondly, there's now a family, like a wife, a husband, children, who are now dependent on that wealth for their future well-being. And they want to make sure that in the event that something happens to them, that they are in a position to recover that Bitcoin and make sure that their family doesn't miss out on all the hard work that they do. And so they're probably the two inflection points in a Bitcoiner's life journey where they reach out to us and say, hey, I don't want to muck this up now. I've got people who are depending on me, and I might just get a quick show of hands. This is probably a common problem for all of us on the call, but does anyone else share the problem where their partner is probably completely disinterested in Bitcoin, and when you start talking about it, the eyes roll back? Yeah, great.
100%.
And the difficulty is when we try to convey how important this is to our loved ones, that, hey, do you understand that your entire future is riding on you understanding how to do this? You still get the roll of the eyes and the, I don't give a shit about this. This is too complicated. This is your bag. And it's like, oh, gosh. Okay. And that's a scary
thing. Yeah, my
thing,
partner, she rolls her eyes when I'll wear these Bitcoin t-shirts and stuff like that. Anyway, I've got this new one, right? This is Fix the Money, Fix the World. She said to me tonight, she goes, oh, I actually don't mind that one.
So that's a problem that we buffer. And I think, having a professional to be in that space with your partner or your beneficiaries, your loved ones, if something happens to you is really what we try and help with. And being a Bitcoiner, you mentioned this earlier, Lockie, there are so many sacrifices that are made. Being a Bitcoiner is typically a really lonely journey. It's difficult. There's not too many people out there. We're oddballs. We're not, normal in any way, shape or form. And it's a really lonely journey. And there are so many sacrifices that are made to be in this. One of the things I shared with you, Lockie, earlier, we make all of our resources and IP available for free. So I'd urge everyone to literally go to the website, read up on, how we do it. There's a ChatGPT bot you can download and use to improve your own self-custody. And one of the things that I want to make available for every Bitcoiner is, hey, this is what I've learned in doing this for clients for the last nearly 10 years. And I think these are the best trade-offs that I can come up with. If anyone has any suggestions to make it better, I'd love to hear it. But the ultimate goal that we want to do and make sure is that in the event of someone passing, that we have the ability to recover that Bitcoin for the family. And this is where a lot of people think or confuse our service for a service that's required by Bitcoiners. And the fact of the matter is it's not really required. Like, none of you sitting in this room, really need this service because you're all capable of doing it yourself. It's really for your loved ones to make sure that they can recover it and do whatever they want with it. But I'd urge you to check out all the resources that we've got, because it'll give you some food for thought and hopefully improve the self-custody setup that you've got.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny you were talking about, someone with a complicated setup, and I do have a friend, actually, he's not here tonight, but he's a nerd like us, right? But he has got this, he can't even tell me, of course, but he's got this complicated approach. It might involve like a book with certain words in it, or, you know what I mean, highlighted, who knows, but it's like, and and his wife is like, oh, I just don't know how I'm going to be able to do this. And, so yeah, I know one of those guys. So with the complicated setup. So did you have a question?
Yeah. So my question was in relation to whether the planning and the structure that you provide for your clients would also include a scenario where you had for instance, a husband and a wife with a self-managed super fund and recovering the Bitcoin, obviously, within the self-managed super fund as well. Yeah, and does it change from obviously holding Bitcoin personally or in a company? No, I don't. That kind of stuff?
Well, the company throws a little bit of a complication to it, but for a self-managed super fund, a personal or a family trust, or a company, they can all be held in different vaults with the one key. So it's actually quite a neat little system. When you've got a multisig, you can have one key that secures unlimited amount of vaults. So you can have your personal, you can have kids vaults, you can have your family trust, you can have a self-managed super fund. And then when it comes to the company, if it's a larger company, and we look after a few larger companies who have got Bitcoin on the balance sheet, there are a host of measures that we can introduce to ensure that every director of the company has sign-off on a transfer that we're signing off on. And we do that through a DocuSign process where we put on each of the directors who have to sign a DocuSign. Once that's all confirmed and committed, then we can co-sign a transaction. So it's a really, like, having a multi-sig gives you so many options and so much flexibility. But most importantly, from my point of view, is it removes the single point of failure, which sadly most Bitcoiners, we overlook, that we don't realize that we are the single point of failure in a setup. So having multiple professionals, and this is where, we work really quite closely with Unchained. We work really closely with a number of others as well. Having two professionals looking at your Bitcoin, I think it's the ideal outcome, because you now have each professional can double check and ensure that each other are doing the right thing. And the risk of two professionals doing the wrong thing who have got a vested interest in hundreds, if not thousands of clients, I think it's kind of a moot point. I don't think that's going to happen. And then if I look at, and this is sort of taking us maybe 2 or 3 years into the future, really 4 years at max, what we're going to see is the evolution of multi-sig coming now. And it's just sort of getting mainstream, whereby you can have a programmable multi-sig. And what does that mean? It means that you can allocate the client key as the master key on the vaults, that they have to sign a transaction for anything to move. And what this solves the collusion problem. Oh, how do I know that, the other two key holders aren't going to collude to take my Bitcoin? Well, you don't have a business if you do that. But, in light of everything that we've been through in the last 4 years with COVID and everything else that's gone on, I understand that Bitcoiners are the very best at this when it comes to not trusting and verifying. To me, the level of comfort I want now is cryptographically verifiable proof. And what Taproot with the programmable multi-sigs allow us to do is to have cryptographically verifiable proof that there's no ability to collude. And then what happens after a period of time is those keys decay where the client key isn't required for signing after a period of 6 or 12 months, and then it reverts to a standard multisig. So all of a sudden, all this technology is coming, and I'm like, oh, to me, this is fantastic. I sort of get worked up about this and really excited about really dorky stuff when it comes to this, but it has a significant impact on how we plan for and how we transfer Bitcoin through to the next generation. Hopefully that answers.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. It's that's why they call it programmable money, right? And we've never had that. I mean, the options really are endless, right? I mean, no longer do you have to store gold in someone else's vault. Anyway, as I was just talking about programmable money, we've got programmable money. Get into a bit of the macro side, just get a feel for where you think we are. And I know you've called Bitcoin a triple point asset, and I think that basically means what? A medium of exchange, store of value, and unit of account, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean by that?
Yes, it is.
And with de-dollarization talks heating up and central banks starting to hoard gold, it appears there's a lot of gold moving around the world at the moment. And obviously, gold appears to still be a pretty popular store of value for the central banks. I mean, how do you see things playing out? And I guess also obviously watching the sort of macro markets of the past couple of months, this sudden drop was a little it caught us by surprise, but it's not abnormal, right, to have drops like this in a bull market. But yeah, so I don't know, large question there, but what's your feel for the outlook and what's going on out there?
I think there's, on the macro picture, I think there's a requirement from the US government, Elon and Trump, to jawbone the bond market into lowering the rates. They're doing that by any means necessary, and at the moment that is the sacrificial lamb to achieve that outcome is the stock market at present, and by extension Bitcoin as well has suffered from that. But if you said to me a year ago the US government's going to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve, they're going to announce it, and then the price is going to go from 109,000 down to 76, I would have said, you are crazy. There's more chance of it going from 109 to a million than there is of it going from 109 to 76. But this is just, the glorious pain of holding Bitcoin is it never does what you expect it to do. And this is where time in the market's so much more important than, timing the market. But on a serious note, I think without wanting to go too deep down the macro rabbit hole, if you have an overlay of geopolitics onto what's happening in the market, it makes perfect sense, because what he's doing in the US, basically everything is is foreshadowed by the US, and then we're all downstream of what happens there. Now, he has been given a mandate. His number one concern and priority that he's prioritised is that he needs to get that debt down. He needs to have cut waste and spending, and he needs to get that 10-year sort of sub 4, maybe even sub 3 if they're lucky. And how do they do that? Well, it's just going to cost every risk asset, and it's going to cost 10 or 20% on the stock market to convince the bond market that, hey, you need lower rates for longer, and guess what? There's no growth in these stocks anymore, so you may as well come and buy the bonds. So I look at that and think, this is what he's doing now, but from a political lens on this, he really has to start moving the economy upwards in the next, he's got 6 months to achieve that outcome, because he needs at least 12-month runway into the midterms in order to get everyone re-elected to continue his political aspirations and policies. I think we could have another 6 months of that jawboning that's going on right now. I don't expect it to go on that long, but we could. And then once they've achieved the outcome that they need to, then money printers start and everything starts humming. But if you look at where we are right now, you had Jay Powell overnight say, we're thinking about ending quantitative tightening. If you think about ending quantitative tightening, that by default means you're thinking about quantitative easing. So I look at this and I think that's wildly bullish. On top of that, if you have a look at a lot of the markets are dictated by liquidity. And, you look at the Chinese M1 money supply over the last since the beginning of the year, it's up nearly 100%. They've started printing. And all of a sudden, this is a macro asset, or it's a global asset that's going to benefit from any money printing anywhere in the world. And now what is a real wild card event that's happening now that never had to have consideration for is you now have the world superpower has indicated that they want to have as much Bitcoin as possible. And what that presents to every other nation globally, Russia, China, the ECB, Britain, is a competition that now is about to start between nation states for buying Bitcoin. And this is something I've dreamt of for years, that we now have someone with a money printer who literally holds their finger down on the button to print more money, having the ability to buy Bitcoin. I look at this and think, this is where, not to sort of denigrate Samson Mao and his theory of the God candle or the Omega candle waking up one day. I firmly believe he's correct, that one day you're going to have one of the governments around the world figure out what this thing is, and they're going to just buy with impunity. And they're just going to say, we will buy any Bitcoin that is for sale on the exchange at whatever price is required. And we're going to go to sleep, and because most of the things happen while we're asleep in the world, because we're basically so far from everywhere and we're a tiny little nation relative to everyone else, we're going to wake up one day and you guys are going to be ringing each other and saying, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Oh my God, this is 10x overnight. And that's my expectation for this asset. That's absolute digital scarcity. And when the governments get involved, then anything can happen. And I think it's fair to say that, governments don't act rationally, and there are going to be people who are making decisions that maybe shouldn't be making decisions. And this is where anything can happen when it comes to this asset. So my thought process is that when you overlay everything that's happening on a geopolitical perspective, a macro perspective, I'm wildly bullish on where we are right now, because it feels like all of those contrary indicators have basically bottomed in the last month or two, and they're heading the right way. But it takes a long time for the social consciousness or the markets to realize, things have changed, because it's like being in a plane staring at the floor that's coming up, or the ground that's coming up. They're focused on it, trying to pull it up, but they don't realize that the ground's so much further away than they thought, and they're actually on the trajectory to save themselves. So it's like turning the Titanic with a paddle pop stick. It just takes time, and I think the markets will realise, well, this was a storm in a teacup, and basically we're off to the moon.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just imagining waking up to that. I think they also call it the green dildo, the green candle that's just gone straight up, and then we'd be saying, oh well, maybe Samson was right, but yeah, I think he's eased back a little bit on his omega candles. I don't know, or maybe I'm just not seeing all these tweets, but. Yeah.
What's really funny, I think Checkmatey has the greatest take on it, where he talks about sideways grind, pop up, sideways grind, pop up, and we're just going to do that all the way to 1 million. I agree with that. I think that's the most likely outcome. But at the same time, I can't rule out basically an Omega candle that takes us there in a matter of days.
Yeah, you're right. We actually had Joe Bryan come talk to us. He's done that video. What's the problem? Yeah, He was great. He was, I love the way he describes things, and but he obviously he talks about the big red button, and I think you're right. When these nations do realize, well, we have to get this, and it's probably going to be a nation maybe outside of the US, and they might decide, well, okay, maybe we need to destroy our currency temporarily just to get as much of this as we can. Do you think that's a possibility?
It's not a possibility, it's a probability, I believe, because someone will do it at some point in time. And, I just look at, I could only dream of having that power to basically print unlimited amounts of money to go and buy Bitcoin. I know what I'd be doing. I'd literally be holding my finger down on the button, and I'd have orders literally, hey, buy more Bitcoin and here's the money. And at some point in time, one of the governments will wake up to the fact that this really is a need, not a want. And this is where most of the world doesn't really understand that it's a need, not a want. They still think it's magic internet money and it's a plaything and it's going to go away. And it's like, well, most of the major technologies that we've got were dismissed when they first started. Electricity was dismissed. Oh, this is cute, but it's never going to catch on. And, the internet. Oh, this is cute, but, basically there are so many cat pics I can look at. And then, basically 25% of internet traffic is dog and cat videos. So all of a sudden this stuff takes time to catch on, and in hindsight it looks like it was inevitable, but at this point in time, for the majority of the population, Bitcoin looks like just looks like a trinket.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I just listened to one of Natalie Brunell's podcast today. She had a guy on there from what is he? The CEO of Bitwise, I think. I can't recall his name right now, but he used to be the CEO of ETFs.com, and he was saying that back in the early days of ETFs, there was all this backlash against them, and saying these ETFs are going to destroy our traditional way of investing, and of course now it's like ETFs are all the rage, right? So that's just another example of these new ideas that come through and get lots of pushback. So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, that's the opportunity that we have.
Yeah. Actually, with this SBR, Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, it is incredible that this has happened, and it did surprise me. And actually, I was also surprised that they didn't include any shitcoins in it, which I'm very glad they didn't, but there was rumors that they were going to. But also, I guess as this started becoming a possibility over the last several months, I started thinking about how they're going to do this, and because as soon as they say anything about it, surely it's just we're going to get these omega candles. But it's interesting because it kind of hasn't happened that way, right? Actually, we've had a drop in the market, and it's almost like this, strategic reserve was already kind of priced in, and then it's had a cool off. And I mean, I don't know, like, are they? And I also wonder that, whenever you get these governments talking and, coming out and saying what they're doing, is it like 4D chess where, what's really going on behind the scenes? And do you think the US government is buying already? Other governments around the world, do you think they're already buying, even based on this news, for example? Or
I think in some capacity, yes, they are. And it would be foolish if they weren't. You've just had a superpower tell you that they're going to be doing something. They've indicated that they want as much Bitcoin as possible. And any government who's not considering this, I think, is missing a huge opportunity to front run a bidder who will basically put a floor in the market. I just don't see how it's not happening. I'm hearing a lot of sovereign wealth funds are buying Bitcoin. Whether or not they're actually buying the underlying or just buying the ETF is another matter. But I think there's huge amounts of capital coming in. But there's still a lot of what I call not frightened capital, but the larger pools of capital aren't allocating to Bitcoin just yet because they want to make sure there's an exit before they put money to work. And so a lot of people think, oh, great, the institutions are here, but the institutions aren't here in any meaningful way, shape or form. And the government will set a floor on the price of Bitcoin when they start accumulating and buying. The larger institutions, in order to allocate meaningful amounts of capital, which is like trillions of dollars to this asset class, the asset class needs to go up by a factor of 10 or 100 before they can do that, really. And ironically, allocating probably $2 to $10 trillion into Bitcoin will lead to 100x in the market cap from where we are today. But if you're a money manager, you don't care about what the upside potential is because your number one priority for your job is to preserve the capital you've been entrusted with. So before you can take a moonshot on Bitcoin, you need to make sure that if you put that money to work in Bitcoin, that you're not going to move the market when you get the money out of it. Wonderful are the upside projections are for Bitcoin. Professional money managers aren't worried about the upside. What they're really worried about is covering their ass on the downside and making sure that they can remove the capital they've put to work in this market with ease, without any consequence. And by consequence, I mean they don't want to have to suffer a 25% drawdown in the price that they're selling because they are the market and they just move the entire market when they sell some Bitcoin. So the market needs to grow dramatically from here in order to accommodate that. And this is where one thing that's, I think, misunderstood with Bitcoin is the best form of collateral ever invented and can take on an unlimited amount of value without disturbing the other parts of the market. And this, to me, is why Bitcoin is the obvious winner when it comes to recapitalizing our banking system, because Bitcoin can take an unlimited amount of capital and it's not going to have a downstream consequence to the cost of living. It's not going to add to the cost of living pressure. It's not going to add to the housing crisis. When you collateralize and capitalize a debt market and a financial market with property, like we have in Australia, like we have in the US, then all of a sudden you need that property price to continue going up and up and up in order to be able to refinance the debt and do everything that you want with it. So it's an inflationary system. But that creates a cost of living and a housing price pressure where we're feeling that in Australia, where we're getting to a point where no one can afford to own a home. We've got, in Sydney, it's a 16 times an average annual salary is the average house price in Sydney. Now, that's not sustainable. if not the highest, it's the second highest, cost per income city in the world. Vancouver might be slightly higher. So it's not sustainable. And so when you move the speculation from the property market and the credit bubble to an asset such as Bitcoin that's not going to have a social consequence for speculation and for pumping up that price, all of a sudden, Bitcoin pretty quickly becomes the asset that they want to monetize. And this is what we're going to live through in the next 10 years. And, people think I'm being hyperbolic when I think Bitcoin should be billions of dollars a coin. But if you understand that framework and the fact that Bitcoin isn't going to impact the cost of living or housing prices, well, it will in some capacity, but not the same way as monetizing the actual underlying housing or stocks. It just makes sense that we will have a multi-billion-dollar Bitcoin in the next 20 years.
And it needs to be like that, doesn't it? I think I heard, the gold market is, about 20 trillion, maybe a little bit more now. It's sort of been moving up in price. But with gold, when large amounts are moved, it doesn't really move the price. Is that correct? Because it has,
It's a much deeper liquidity pool than Bitcoin. By default, it's probably a market that's at least 10 times bigger than Bitcoin. So, governments, banks around the world can get money in and out, capital in and out really easily. There's a very liquid market, and you're not going to move the price that much by selling, call it, half a trillion dollars of gold will have a big impact. But if you were to sell $500 billion of Bitcoin, the price would drop 50, 60%.
Yeah, absolutely. You probably struggle to sell that amount on OTC, I guess.
Yeah, you'd struggle.
Yeah. What about Bitcoin for Australia? I think Bitcoin's been pretty relaxed on regulations and things like that, and maybe pretty quiet as well. What do you think's are you involved in the sort of Aussie Bitcoin scene? And I know you were at Bitcoin Alive recently as well, so just wondering what your thoughts are there in terms of Bitcoin in Australia.
I know nowhere near as much as I should, but one of our team members, Bayani, works at the Australian Bitcoin industry body, ABIB, and he is the man to ask when it comes to that. But one thing I will say is that we have very limited guidance and regulations around Bitcoin, and we are suffering from a banking choke point 2.0. That is a very real thing where the banks are limiting access to client funds to transfer to buy Bitcoin. That is a very real problem that we see on a day-to-day basis. It is infuriating for clients who have worked their life to save this amount of money, and they want to move that money from here to there to buy this asset that can, help them out of or help improve their financial situation. And they have a bank that, for your protection, will stop this transaction happening. It's incredibly infuriating, and it only serves the purpose of reminding the client that the money that they think they've got in the bank is not theirs, which ironically makes them more determined to have more Bitcoin, because they realize after going through that experience that none of the money that they've got in the bank is theirs. They don't have any control over it whatsoever. And some erroneous administrator who works in a fraud department within a bank can literally put his finger on the cancel button and say, you're not allowed to move it to that account because we deem so. It's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, really is. We've got experience of that in the room, even with coming from Macquarie Bank, right, and trying to enter, signing up with an exchange like two exchanges, Bitteroo and Independent Reserve, right, and then trying to put their BSB numbers into Macquarie, but Macquarie saying, "Nah, don't recognise that BSB. Sorry."
Computer says no, right? Yeah, I know.
Yeah, yeah.
It's wrong.
You worked it out though, didn't you? Kind of. Oh yeah. Independent Reserve gave him a different BSB,
an alternate.
Speaking of banks, what? Yeah, do you think they're about to start really embracing Bitcoin? It looks like in the US that's probably going to happen with the repeal of, I think it was like SAB 121.
I think that's the most important thing to happen in Bitcoin in the last 2 years. A lot of people think the ETF's important. A lot of people think the strategic Bitcoin reserve's important. But to me, the most important thing that's happened is the repeal of SAB 121, which removes the requirement for capital to be reserved for holding Bitcoin or crypto on the banking balance sheet. And so it was cost prohibitive for the banks to custody Bitcoin. with the repeal of SAB 121, all of a sudden they can hold an unlimited amount of capital and they don't require any capital reserves to cover it. So I think this is a huge thing. And to me, this sets the foundation. That is the first domino that's been tipped over in the actions of banks being able to not only custody Bitcoin in a profitable fashion, but then build out the savings and the loan products on the back of it. So without the custody and without the repeal of SAB 121, it was cost prohibitive to do anything in Bitcoin. Now that's been removed, all of this innovation is going to flow through, and over the next 5 years, I think it'll be a dramatically different landscape from where we are now.
Yeah, amazing. And I guess that would just naturally flow to Australia. I mean, we're probably more followers than anything, right?
Basically, that's our role. The US is going to say something, and we're going to say, yes, boss, and we're going to just follow on what they're doing. And this is where, the Operation Choke Point 2.0 that's happening here. The banks here haven't got the memo that that's not what the US wants now. The US has said, hey, we're pro-Bitcoin, we're pro-crypto, we want this to happen, we want the banks to do it. Basically, get your bums into gear about how to, mainstream these services through the banking sector. But our not only our government, but our banking sector is just, sticking their fingers in their ear and saying, la, 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 just thinking that the Trump administration and the pro-Bitcoin government in the US is going to go away. And it's like, no, we're going to get run over and left behind if we don't start changing our attitude to it.
Yeah, and of course, where there's money to be made, I mean, that's where the banks want to be too, right? So
that's it. Show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been incredible watching like Tether's journey as well too. And I mean, I think they've been more profitable than Goldman Sachs, for example, with only 130 employees. Obviously, companies like, I don't know, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, no doubt would know about what's going on there. And I'm sure they would want a piece of that action. So
I agree. And what's funny and sad is Larry Fink's spent his last 40 years trying to financialize the entire ecosystem of finance and property and asset globally. And in the space of less than 10 years, or call it 12 years, Tether has been able to achieve more than he has with 150 employees and has been able to double the profit that he has working for the last 40 years. It must be incredibly infuriating for Larry to think, oh my goodness, someone's beat me to the punch on this. And what's interesting about this is that, Tether is a one-to-one asset held. There's no refactoring or rehypothecating of those assets, or that's what they tell us. And they've been able to create a business that's far more profitable than all of the banks who are rehypothecating. So it's just a modern marvel what Paolo and his team has been able to achieve, and it has all of the major banks globally looking at this, thinking, how can we get in on that racket?
Yeah, absolutely. Is it true? Do you know how it works at a basic level? Because I think that, they obviously buy these treasury bills or treasury notes, and then they create the Tether stablecoin, on the blockchain. So effectively, it's kind of doubling the supply, right? Is it of money when they do that, even though it's backed one-to-one?
No. So what they do is they receive money. They don't receive it in treasuries. They receive it in cash. They convert that cash to treasuries and they mint a Tether token. So it is, if there's 120 billion in Tether, then they're holding $120 billion of assets. Probably about $130 billion of assets, because from memory, I think they hold somewhere between $8 to $12 billion of Bitcoin. So not only they have all their money in treasuries, which is basically spitting out a 4 to 5% rate of return for them, they're also having Bitcoin on the balance sheet, so they can plow the profits back into more Bitcoin. It's an insanely successful business. It's very impressive.
And of course, I hear now we've got Tether, which is now going to be on Lightning, right? So I think that could be pretty huge.
I think it will be. All of these second layer apps on Bitcoin are really important for the day-to-day medium exchange. My good friend Jeff Booth, this is probably something I haven't evolved as much as he has to understand how important the medium exchange is on Bitcoin. But this is something that he works day in, day out at spreading that message and investing in companies that deliver those outcomes. Personally, I place less importance on that because I think getting the recapitalization of the financial markets is just as important, if not more important, than the day-to-day mean of exchange transactions. And if you break down store of value, mean of exchange, and unit of account, store of value is a $20 trillion industry, mean of exchange is a $100 trillion industry, but unit of account is a $2,000 trillion industry. And to me, if you want to come for the king, it's unit of account that you want to take. And to me, the interesting thing about Bitcoin, which is really boring, so everyone will probably fall asleep at this thought, but to me, this is the first accounting innovation that we've had in the last 600 years. The last accounting innovation we had was a double entry ledger system that was an upgrade on a single entry ledger system, which allowed for and brought about an explosion in global trade from the Venetians. And now we have a triple entry ledger system in Bitcoin that anyone who has access to the network can see everything that's gone on in it. This is a much better unit of account than our existing double entry ledger system that we're using now. And so my conjecture is that all value will be accounted for in Bitcoin at some point in time in the future, because we have a finite amount of Bitcoin with a hard cap on it. So everything needs to be contained in that constrained environment. Whereas in a double entry ledger system, it's like that old joke, how do you know you've got a good accountant? Ask them what 1 + 1 is. If they're any good, they're going to shut the blind and they'll whisper in your ear, what do you want it to be? And that's kind of the fiat system that we're having or that we're working with at the moment. We're slowly transferring assets and unit of account to a Bitcoin standard, which I think is a much fairer, much easier system to understand once you understand the nuance to it.
Yeah, I've thought about that a bit myself, actually. And what comes to mind is that with that triple entry that you say, ultimately it brings trust, right? And so, what unit of account are you going to rely on as the most trustworthy, right? And that's what the blockchain provides, right?
Okay.
Does your Bitcoin super need to be stored on a different wallet to your personal wallet?
Oh, yeah. So you with the Bitcoin Super, because I know you guys advise on SMSFs too, right?
We advise on how to custody your Bitcoin in an SMSF, not advise on SMSF. So slight distinction. We get in trouble if we say we advise on SMSFs. We advise on the safe custody of Bitcoin in an SMSF. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good, because the question is, does your super funds need to be like in a separate Bitcoin wallet, basically? Yeah, I think that's a requirement, yes. Right?
Well, technically, it's not a requirement, because you might be able to prove that UTXO is solely for the use of the self-managed super fund. But I don't think it's a fight that's worth picking. You can have multiple different accounts on a single device, and you can have multiple different vaults in a collaborative security setup with multisig. So you don't need to put it into the same wallet. It's very easy to set up multiple different accounts or vaults.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned before you do most of you recommend using Unchained, right? That's what you do with your clients?
Unchained's fantastic. We love Thea as well. There are so many great companies in this multi-sig space. It's hard to pick a winner, but Unchained's fantastic. I use Unchained. I use Thea. I use Nunchuck.
What's Thea? How do you spell that?
Theya. That is a fabulous, fabulous user experience. You can get set up in a multi-sig vault in less than 5 minutes with us. It's incredibly powerful. It's a really great user-friendly multi-sig.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Excellent.
We had a question before. We were wondering if you have any opinion on what's going on with El Salvador and the IMF.
I just think that's a little bit of argy-bargy between the two. I think Bitcoiners have Bukele in a very positive light, and there's been nothing but praise and positivity coming out of his reforms and initiatives. I think the IMF has got concerns, and as Bitcoiners, we put that through, any concerns that they raise, there is an air of illegitimacy to their concerns because they're trying to knock Bitcoin. But who knows? They may have some real concerns that, do have a substantial impact. But I've got to say, I think Nayib Bukele is putting himself as one of the great global leaders at the moment. And he's done that through sheer will and force. And what he's achieved in that country is, I think, unparalleled anywhere else in the world. He's restored, from the murder capital of the world to one of the safest countries on earth. That's an insane achievement, what he's been able to do in such a short period of time. There was judicial reform that he had to come in and, basically remove all of the grift, graft and corruption, and he was able to achieve that. All at the same time, trying to put the country onto a Bitcoin standard and have everyone use, Lightning Pay or the Lightning Network as their mean of exchange network. I think he's just, if we had more world leaders like him, or heads of state like him, we'd be in a much better place.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah, I hope they're just trying to take advantage of the IMF funds, but yeah, I'm not quite sure how it all works. So
I hope so too.
Yeah. Any other questions in the room?
Hey, Peter.
Hey, how you going?
Yeah, good, thanks. I was just wondering, this is something I've thought about for a little while, and I've never put the time aside to look into it. But when you hear predictions for Bitcoin, for example, 4 billion, 7 billion, 10 billion, take it as high as you like, and it can only be divisible by 100 million, you get to a point where each sat's worth 40, 50, $100 AUD, or USD, however you're looking at it. How do you then make, or how do you see being able to make smaller purchases to use it as a currency, for example? You're not going to buy coffee for $40, for example.
You can add as many zeros to the right of the decimal place on the 21 million as you wish. So it goes to 8 decimal places now. It's not a difficult thing to change from 8 decimal places to 10, 12, or 20, or 30, or 100 decimal places. So you can change any, you can add as many zeros as you want to the right of the decimal place. The only thing you can't change is any number to the left of the decimal place. So 21 million is fixed. That is all there's going to be. So you can solve that issue that you raised by just adding the ability to add more decimal places beyond the 100 million Satoshis.
So you can get to a point where it can be divisible by 1 billion or 10 billion, and you can make it as small as you like then.
Yeah, like one Satoshi could be 100 to one Satoshi, or 1,000, or yeah.
Right. Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Thank you.
It's actually already in operation, isn't it? I think Lightning already has the microsats or something like that. Is that right?
Correct. And I think it's I think there's 100th of a Satoshi on the Lightning Network. So you already have the ability to go to $10 billion units per Bitcoin, but you've got to use the Lightning Network to achieve that.
Yeah, okay, interesting. I've never used the Lightning Network, so that's why I don't know that. But thank you. That clears that up massively for me.
And that'll be especially relevant for what do we call it? Like streaming, or what do we call it? Like streaming sats, for example. I guess that's it. That's what I was looking for.
I mean, the world is becoming more and more micropayments focused, and so that's exactly where my head was going with it. But yeah, no, that's great to know. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Cracks me up as well, because it just made me think of some of those economists who come onto Twitter and gone, yeah, well, Bitcoin, you can just make more of it, because you can add zeros, and then it's the classic, what is it? You've got one pizza.
The pie,
it's like,
pizza.
We'll feed the world, because we'll just slice up that pizza and we can do smaller slices,
Yeah.
Like it's incredible how many there's been a few who've come out with that, right?
You know what? These are trained economists who should know better, and all it just shows you is these people are so retarded. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I know. Yep. Yeah, this is the question about asset allocation, and I guess maybe how you advise clients around that. Does it depend on the person? I know you kind of mentioned a bit about this before, but then, as it expands, or let's say that 5%, 10%, 20%, whatever grows, do you then recommend, balancing that, or just increasing the, I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying?
No,
I'm pretty sure I know what your answer is going to be.
My job is trying to get clients to buy more Bitcoin, not less. And I haven't met a client or a prospect who we haven't been able to dramatically improve their outcome. Sadly, we're all short Bitcoin. You look at the greatest proponent of Bitcoin at the moment is Michael Saylor, and he's got 500,000 of these things and he doesn't have enough. I'm like, that really is the moral of the story. But on a serious note, thinking about this, if you've got an allocation of 10% of your wealth and it goes up 100x, you've now 10x your entire wealth. A lot of money managers will look at this and say, we've got to take money off the table. We've got to redistribute to diversify and take some profits. And I look at this and think, you are looking at this the wrong way, because the existing portfolio that was 90% of your portfolio 10 years ago is now 10% of your portfolio. you now have the diversification that you need. You've just got a mega return in Bitcoin that is going to outperform every other asset over the next 10 or 20 years. Why would you dilute that outcome? There's no reason to dilute that. And if you understand the technology, you're not going to dilute yourself. You're actually going to sell some of the other assets that you've got to have a greater exposure to it. That's what happens. The more you know, the more you buy. And so for me personally, I want to try and spend as much time with my clients answering any of their concerns or fears around allocating further capital to it, because once they peel back the layers and understand what this thing is, they will add further capital to it. And, you know, typically it goes one way. It's like a one-way valve, capital in, capital in, capital in. Having said that, we're sort of getting to a point with some of our clients who have been in it for nearly 10 years now that they do want to take some off the table, and they want to have some lifestyle decisions, whether it's a family home, a holiday home, or alternatively, you know, they might want to spoil themselves with, I don't know, a nice car or something else. That's a real concern, but that's a long way down the track after a 100x or 150, 200x return. So I think, horses for courses, but most people, we're trying to still allocate further to it because I firmly believe that there's more upside in front of us than behind us. And so if anyone's listening to this who hasn't invested in Bitcoin yet, think of me at $3 missing out on Bitcoin. Well, it's like me having an opportunity to buy Bitcoin at $3 again. That's the opportunity presented to everyone who's looking to buy now, because on a risk-adjusted basis, now is the best time to be buying Bitcoin, because you now have that left tail event of Bitcoin going to zero and the government shutting it down has been totally removed, because the US government stepped in and said, we support it and we're going to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So once you understand that this thing's going to go up forever, and you've now removed the left side tail event of a catastrophic failure where Bitcoin goes to zero, now's the time to be buying Bitcoin and adding to that position, not taking capital off the table and trying to diversify.
Yeah, yep, 100% well said. Yeah.
Leveraging?
Leveraging. What's your thoughts on leveraging, or are you talking about like maybe borrowing against your Bitcoin, for example,
so
or
increasing value.
Yeah.
Rather than selling it.
rather than selling your Bitcoin now, like
Tax.
maybe take some fiat out by using one of these Bitcoin-backed loans or something like that.
Yep. I think it's horses for courses. Leverage, in my line of work, there are only two things that can level any amount of wealth, the wealthiest families. One is gambling and the other is leverage. And sometimes those two are conflated to be one and the same. So I think leverage needs to come with great restraint and an understanding of the risks that you're about to undertake. One of the things that I look at that most Bitcoiners suffer from is that they have the majority of their assets in Bitcoin and they don't have a way of monetizing that in the form of an income. And so I look at some of the most interesting things in Bitcoin are happening off the ball on Bitcoin that are actually downstream derivative products of Bitcoin. And I look at this and think, you've got Bitcoin as the primitive that is literally terraforming the entire financial world as we see it. The traditional finance world doesn't understand that this thing's coming whether they like it or not. And it all starts with Bitcoin because Bitcoin's the best performing asset. And downstream of that, the first derivative of that is, say, MicroStrategy and MetaPlanet, which are the two best performing stocks on Earth. Downstream of those is the convertible notes issue or convertible bonds that MicroStrategy's issued, which are by far the best performing bonds on Earth by the proverbial country mile. Nothing on Earth comes close to those bonds. And, Saylor's mentioned that he's got a $300 trillion bond market that he's got his eye on, and he thinks he can get, a $300 trillion bond market, and he thinks he can get 1% of that. That's $3 trillion of bond issuance to go and buy Bitcoin with. I think that's very real. And then downstream of, those things is your income ETFs like the MSTY, which is generating an income based on the volatility of MicroStrategy. And I look at this and I think traditional finance and most of the investing world, because they don't understand the primitive in Bitcoin, they don't understand the derivative in MicroStrategy and how they can achieve those returns. They look at that and want to dismiss it as a Ponzi scheme and something that's going to blow up. And then by default, because of that bias that they've got towards the stock of MicroStrategy, they're not going to invest any money in the best performing income fund on Earth, which is the MSTY fund, which is returning close to 100% per annum. I look at this and think, being a Bitcoiner, now that Bitcoiner has infiltrated traditional finance, everyone in the room and on the call tonight is at a huge advantage because they understand how Bitcoin works. And understanding how Bitcoin works, you realize that everything is downstream of Bitcoin. So you're more receptive to understanding MicroStrategy, you're more receptive to understanding why those convertible bonds can return such insane returns relative to its peers. And then you understand how the income fund can actually generate, circa 50% plus returns per annum on a risk adjusted basis. It's a much lower risk than you would expect for an asset that's returning 50% per annum.
Yeah, it sounds like you've really dived deep into micro or snackle strategy, right? And these products is that an area you're starting to advise on with these sorts of products as well, and possibly offering that to your clients? Or
on the traditional side of things, we've advised on MicroStrategy for many years now. We're very comfortable advising on that for the traditional finance clients as well. So yeah, we've got clients sitting on 10, 20x returns on MicroStrategy over the last 3 or 4 years. So that plays into some of the advice that we deliver to clients in the traditional space.
Yeah, right. Yeah, incredible. Okay, so just to sort of sum that up, are you trying to say, or essentially are you saying that these products could be worth considering? There's obviously the leverage option if you're going to do that. Obviously be aware of the risks and maybe make it a small percentage of your portfolio, so that you can cover any of those, margin calls or liquidation events, or not get liquidated. And then are you suggesting that maybe some of these other, MicroStrategy related products could be worth considering too for getting a bit of leverage?
Potentially, yes. Yes. In short, yes, but that's a financial product which we don't really discuss in any way, shape or form. But to me, in a bull market, I think it's fair to assume that MicroStrategy will most likely outperform Bitcoin. But finding an asset that's going to outperform Bitcoin reliably is very difficult. It's a boy on a man's errand. It's very, very difficult, and it's fraught with risk. In my line of thinking, I look at this from, say, purely a Bitcoin lens. I look at and think that tossing around some ideas around market exposure and what that looks like, what ends up happening, I think, for most Bitcoiners is that they do want some exposure to a MicroStrategy or a MetaPlanet, and they will be able to get it in structures that they can't get Bitcoin. So it might be the pension system in the UK doesn't allow for underlying ownership of Bitcoin. So a lot of our clients over there do strategy and get their exposure that way. Similar to the 401ks, there's the IRA option, which is like a self-managed super fund here that allows you to do that. But some people don't have or want access to that, so they need some exposure to it. And I think, to me, most Bitcoiners will end up with 90% of their portfolio sitting in Bitcoin, and they'll have 9% of their portfolio sitting in MicroStrategy. And then they'll have 1% of that portfolio sitting in an MSTY type income style. And depending on where they are in the cycle, they're going to swap in and out between those three. And right there, what you've got is the ultimate savings tool in Bitcoin. You've got some alpha return over and above Bitcoin if you time the market correctly. Having said that, if you don't, you're going to lose and you're going to end up with less Bitcoin. So be careful. That's pure speculation. And then you've got MSTY, which throws off such a huge income, it completely redefines the whole 60-40 investment portfolio that most financial advisors are working with. Because what's interesting is if you had, just let me think about this, if you had 2% of your total investable assets invested in MSTY, that income fund at present will throw off the equivalent of having 40% of your net assets in a bond fund. So in a 60-40 portfolio. So what that means, and this is say some of the work that we conduct on a daily basis, thinking about this, is that product helps redefine how we structure the rest of the portfolios in traditional finance. So without wanting to give any investment advice, just telling you how I'm thinking about this, understanding Bitcoin and understanding that Bitcoin is the precursor that's terraforming the rest of the financial world, all of a sudden we can achieve the same in income for a client by investing 2% into that MSTY that would typically require 40% of their entire assets. So we can have 20x less exposure to the shitty bond assets, which have been horrible assets to hold, by a little bit of this. And if 2% of your portfolio blows up and it's a catastrophic failure, then that's something that most people can live with. And for my clients, I explain that this could be a catastrophic failure. It could end up with a big fat donut, but in light of what it allows you to achieve with the remaining 38% that you freed up of capital, to invest in the better performing assets like Bitcoin et al., then that's a risk worth taking for most people.
Yeah, that's very interesting, actually, yes, because I think we did have someone come talk to us about SMSFs, actually, and I think he was saying that you can't, with your SMSF, your super funds, you can't take loans out, I believe. Is that correct? So you couldn't, for example, do a bit of leverage with your Bitcoin in your super by doing a Bitcoin backed
There's
loan.
no leverage.
I think
No leverage.
right, but
Yeah.
right. But what you can do is buy something like MSTY or MSTR or something like that, right? Which effectively gives
Correct.
you a bit of
You can.
leverage. If you're wanting to, say, set up a business in another country, maybe El Salvador or something like that, right? Taking your Bitcoin over the border. But I mean, I'm guessing, what were you asking, what would the best setup for that might be? Or Brain wallet? No.
I personally would structure it with collaborative security. I wouldn't be comfortable transferring it on a single sig wallet. I wouldn't be transferring it. I wouldn't leave it on an exchange. I would structure it by way of a multisig collaborative security protocol, and you might even like to do a time lock transfer that takes 2 or 3 weeks to get there, so you can leave, you can set yourself up, get comfortable, set your vaults up and everything else, and then receive the transaction. So I think you want to be having a multi-sig on that, and the thought of traveling through customs with a single sig, in light of some of the stories I've heard, are terrifying. I would never do that.
Yeah, right. So you've heard some stories, like, are you talking about customs confiscating hardware wallets or wanting to see what's on them, for example, or is that right? Both. Yeah. Wow. What about phones? Have you heard of customs wanting to look at phones, see what wallets are on phones, for example, or same sort of
They
thing?
want to look at that too. Yeah.
Yeah. I know one of our members, he's not here tonight either, but he travels a lot, and I know recently he did this. I don't know if he does it every trip because it sounds like a nightmare, but he uses Graphene OS. Have you heard of that phone system or operating system? Nice, privacy. Yep, privacy focused, and he wipes it and then restores it when he gets there. Because that's his main phone basically. So I don't know if he's still doing that, but
sounds like a pain in the ass.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything you want to mention about the services you offer, and also just the best way to get in touch?
Good question. I think on a personal level, we're all here on a Thursday night. It's getting late, 9:30. We're all obviously mad keen Bitcoiners. I would strongly suggest anyone who wants to review their setup, wants to think about it, please check out our website, thebitcoinadvisor.com, and that's advisor with an ER. Alternatively, if you've got any questions, download the chat GPT bot and ask that questions, or if you don't get any satisfaction or want to have a chat to me, then literally just reach out to me to have a chat, or one of our team members. We've got, I think, some of the best Bitcoiners in the world on our team, and it's a lot of fun helping clients with their self-custody. So we make all of our resources and IP available for free because we want Bitcoiners to be a success. If you're here now, you're early, and you're going to be insanely wealthy at some point in time. You just need to make sure you're doing everything you can to protect it. So we give away all that IP for free because we want to see you succeed. And if that's not enough to help improve your outcomes to your satisfaction, then please reach out to us. We'd love to help you do that in any capacity that we may.
Yeah, amazing. And best way to get in touch then, just through the website, or? I
think through the website, or alternatively, the X handle is Peter BTC Advisor, and you can DM me there. I might be a little slow getting back to you, but either that or the website is the best place.
Oh, yeah. Do you guys do a newsletter or anything like that?
We have done, and we need to get that started again. So that'll probably be coming soon, I'd say.
Okay. Yep. Fair enough. All right. Cool. Is there anything else you wanted to add, or?
No, I just think be patient. The next 6 to 12 months are going to be a lot of fun, but it's going to be testing along the way. Bitcoin's in really great shape. I've never seen it in better shape than where we are right now. So don't listen to all the nervous Nellies and the people who want to tell you that the bull market's over and Bitcoin's dead. It's exactly where it needs to be.
Yep, I totally agree. It's incredible that we're here where we are now and what's happened. Absolutely incredible. So, Pete, really, really appreciate you doing this. I think I know you do even offer, I think, chats to people as well. If they're interested in, getting your advice, I think they can do that through the website too, right?
Sure can. Yeah.
But means a lot to us all here, and it's been invaluable listening to all your advice and information. So thanks Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure, and hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah, awesome. And Michael's your brother, right?
He is, ironically, and
Yeah.
yeah, a funny story. I was about to go on stage at Cheat Code with Mike, Danny Knowles, and one other, and the other person who was on stage, coming on stage with us, said, "Oh my goodness, I just love you and Michael. You are my favorite father-son combo in Bitcoin." And Michael and I looked at each other like, "What the fuck?" And she realized what she said. She's like, "Oh no, did I just say that?" I was like, "Yeah." Anyway, we all had this huge laugh, and when we went on stage, we all had to introduce ourselves, and I couldn't help it. Danny introduced, she introduced herself, Michael introduced herself, and then I said, contrary to popular belief, I'm actually Michael's brother, not father, as some of you may not know. So, yeah, it's always fun. But he's an impressive guy, and some people get unlucky. Sorry, Mike.
Yeah, I don't know if you know, he did one of these with us as well. So we've had
Oh,
both
did
of
he?
you now.
He would have been fun, high energy, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, you're both brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. So obviously come from some good stock.
That's all him. I've got a debt of gratitude there. So it's been really helpful.
So was he the one? Was he the one telling you about Bitcoin all those years ago?
Yeah, he was. Yep. And this is before we had all of the podcasts and the books and the this and that and everything else. And, I'd speak to him every other day type thing and catch up, on his news and the rest of it. And I'd have 1,000 questions on Bitcoin and what about this? What about that? And what if the government shut it down? And you name it, he answered it. He was absolutely brilliant in my Bitcoin journey. So, he's never swayed from Bitcoin. It's always been about Bitcoin for him. So I've been really fortunate that I've had some really great mentors in this space.
Yeah, I'm guessing you're not going to be opening the doors to Solana or Ethereum or anything like that anytime soon.
No, I don't. But it's funny on that, if I want to go out the risk curve on Bitcoin, it's a micro strategy. That's it. It's like that, maybe Meta Planet. Like, what, that's as comfortable as I can get with going out the risk curve. I just think, at least if I go to a micro strategy or a Meta Planet with that, when the God candle comes, which I believe it will at some point in time, I will not be left behind because those stocks will benefit from that uptick. Whereas the government is not going to turn around and start buying Solana and Ethereum. It's just never going to happen. That's my small indulgence, that most of my assets are in Bitcoin, but a small allocation to MSTR is a guilty pleasure.
Yeah. I've recently done the same myself. So I've got a small allocation to MSTR, just when it came down recently, and I'd sort of been watching it for a while, and then look, I knew about it probably as long as you have, because I've been in the space for a long time. But I was a bit just I don't know. I think I was thinking, oh, that's possibly shit coining. No, I'm not going to go there. Do you know what I mean? Like, but I could have, early on, how long's it been out since they started buying Bitcoin? Is it like 3 years now, 4 years? I don't know.
I think it's August 2020, so it'll be 4.5 years, close to 4.5 years.
Yeah.
So, you know what? I think Michael Saylor does a great job. I think he's a wonderful advocate for Bitcoin, and I like to support him, and I do that by way of investing in his company. I think that's the least I can do to support someone who does so much for Bitcoin. So if it is a catastrophic failure in MicroStrategy, then I'm prepared for that and I can live with that. But the bulk of my investments are in Bitcoin, so it's a relatively low risk if something were to happen there.
Yeah. The latest offering is called Strife, right? STRIFE.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I'd love
it's
to know.
Fun.
Coming up with that, I'd love to know the boardroom talk about that.
Yeah, I think you're going to find some very amusing things, and the acronym STRIFE for coming up with that share offering, I think, is indicative of what he thinks of it. He thinks it's basically a bucket of shit. Someone's going to buy it because there's a risk profile to buy that, so he's just delivering the market what it wants.
Yeah, I think that's the one he's catering towards, the bond market, right? The 300 trillion bond market, I think.
Yeah. No. The one that does that is Strike.
Oh, Strike. Okay. Yeah.
So strike is the convertible note, I think. No, sorry, strike is the preferred stock. Strife is the just the issuance with the dividend, which is kind of trying to achieve that. But the convertible notes is a different beast in itself. That's a different side of the balance sheet. They're all equities, although they act like a quasi debt instrument because of the distributions or dividends that it pays. But the real juice, I think, over the next 10 years will come from trying to tap that $300 trillion bond market through convertible bonds.
Yep, so much more learning to do there. It's it's fascinating and a complete revolution. But on that note, look, we'll let you go. Again, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lockie, and thanks everyone for turning up to come and have a chat. It's been a real pleasure. So thanks so much.